Hello and welcome back to my TransAmerica Trail Adventure Across America series. In part 13, I wallowed around in the rain and mud as I finished out the great state of Mississippi. There were some beautiful sights and some doggo friends, but I was now in Tennessee and I had some big plans for my birthday. I decided that on my special day I wanted to ride the first section of the Tat in Tennessee, and then after a few hours cruise up to Nashville to catch the Music City Grand Prix, where I was lucky enough to snag a campsite only a half hour outside the city. The Tat started out pretty normal with some picturesque farm roads with a big blue sky as the backdrop. And then, of course, the random dog bolting out from behind the brush to scare you off his property and possibly get a quick taste of your motorcycle boots. This is actually the first dog I got on film chasing me, as this would always happen, but I would fumble to start the GoPro as fleeing always took priority. After a few hours of riding, I hopped on the road to Nashville, but not before watching this cute little deer shoot out on the road and get startled by my loud motorcycle. He was so panicked that he neglected to see the camouflaged chain link fence and dove headfirst into it. Poor guy. He was okay though, I promise. I made my way into Nashville after setting up camp and paying a whopping $50 just to park my motorcycle for a few hours. Thanks, Nashville. The races were pretty freaking sweet though. I got there right as the stadium trucks were wrapping up, which was a bummer as I really wanted to see that race in its entirety. Luckily, I got to see all the cars go. This was my first race I ever attended and I was happy I made the journey to come check it out. The sweet smell of gasoline and burning rubber mixed with ear-deafening engines really gets the blood pumping. After the race, there was a free concert, which I thought they would have canceled because it started dumping rain. But no, they fired up the music and everyone danced soaked to the bone. Pretty cool thing to be a part of, I must say. The night was wrapped up with a big fireworks show. By this point, everyone was whipped into a complete party frenzy, but I needed sleep. When I got back to the campsite, the gate was closed, so I had to get technical and squeeze through the pedestrian pathway. I felt like a kid sneaking back after curfew, but I mean seriously, who locks the gate to a campground? The next morning, I packed up my goodies and hopped on the highway to reconnect with the Tat. After about an hour of riding, something unimaginable happened. I went to downshift, and there was no shift lever. I guess it rattled loose and fell off at some point. This was a huge problem as I was stuck in 5th gear and would have to rev the heck out of my bike and ease the clutch out in attempts to get the bike up to highway speed. It didn't help matters that it started dumping rain, and I had to go over a pass with only my top speed gear. I could smell my clutch burning the entire time as I feathered it to keep my bike from stalling. Everything was going to crap. I need to make some big decisions here. I decided to divert to Chattanooga where I'd be close to the trail, but I'd also be in a big city where I could hopefully find a spare shifter for my bike. I found a campsite not too far from the city, but the weather was absolutely cooking with a heat index of 106. Even worse, I'd be stuck here for a total of 4 days as the part I needed was not available at any shop within a 100-mile radius, and I'd have to wait for it to get delivered through Amazon. I utilized this downtime to do some maintenance on my bike, as there really wasn't much else I could do but wait. These 4 days were probably some of the most testing on me mentally. There was literally nothing I could do but sit around and wait for Amazon updates. I had exhausted all my options and I just had to come to terms with the fact that I was stranded for the time being. Luckily, there was a store nearby and a lake to cool off in, so I guess things could have been worse. When my part finally showed up, I was overjoyed and felt like my freedom had been restored. It's crazy that the absence of such a small piece of metal could almost completely disable a motorcycle. I wasted no time getting the lever installed and was pleased to find out that it worked as good, if not better, than my stock shifter. This one got double extra Loctite though. I was so stoked to be riding again. I decided to head to the eastern portion of Tennessee to reconnect with the Tat as the weather was predicted to get bad. I didn't even mind that I had to drive through some congested freeways. I was just happy to be mobile again. Just as things were beginning to look up, I received some very sad news. My girlfriend's dog Bullet became very sick and had to be put to rest. This was devastating news as she had just lost her best friend and I couldn't even be there to comfort her. It was a very somber day indeed. I just wanted to throw in the towel and fly back home to give my girlfriend a big hug and help her through this tough time. But despite her broken heart, she urged me to go onwards and finish this journey. I was 42 days into my trip and I needed to wrap things up, as I felt so detached from my life back home and I missed those I cared about. I set up camp near the eastern border of Tennessee and braced for the big storm that was set to hit that night. The storm never hit where I was camping, but the trails the next day painted a very different picture. This section of the Tat was tore up. Puddles the size of small swimming pools were popping up at every turn, and the mud was just slick enough to keep you from making any good time. Everywhere I looked there was carnage. Branches busted into a million pieces, along with small trees that would fall directly across the path and I would have to carry off, which I found pretty comical at the time, but only if I knew what awaited me down the trail. The further I plunged into the forest, the more I realized what I was getting myself into. The Tat was pretty much motorcycles only at this point, unless you were cruising these trails in your lowered Honda. This section was beginning to get sketchy, as the trails marked on my map seemingly did not exist, and I often found myself navigating down some unmarked trails of varying difficulty in hopes to reconnect with the Tat down the line. I was still very appreciative of all the natural beauty that surrounded me on every side. The rivers and creeks were seemingly infinite in these parts, a sight that never gets old. I was enjoying myself as I was making my way closer and closer to the border of North Carolina, but this is where things quickly became complicated. I once again found myself on another mystery trail that was rather overgrown. Now I understand that this forest is very green, but I know that this amount of growth doesn't happen overnight, and after cruising down this path for a good chunk of time, it all became crystal clear. A ginormous tree had fallen and was completely blocking the passageway. Not even my saw would be able to cut through this monster. I spent about an hour trying to navigate around this section, but I hit a dead end in every direction and had no choice but to turn back and make the 3+ hour ride to the road. This was a real gut punch as I pretty much wasted half a day of riding only to end up back where I started. Luckily, the views off the highway were pretty magnificent, and I was more than making up for the time at these speeds. Before long, I was crossing the border into North Carolina, and I couldn't be happier. Tennessee royally kicked my butt between mechanical failures and trail conditions. From the looks of the sky, you wouldn't think the day would shortly turn into this. Apparently, Tropical Storm Fred was landing a little sooner than anticipated. I knew the trails would be absolutely atrocious and unrideable in these conditions. I only had a few days left until the tropical storm was set to hit, and I didn't want to get caught with my pants down. I decided to omit the Virginia and West Virginia section of the Tat and just finish out the North Carolina section. I'm sure glad I did. As I made my way into the middle of North Carolina, the heat and humidity ramped up to a level I'd not previously experienced. I was riding along the highway near Raleigh when I began to feel the effects of heat exhaustion, as my vision became blurry and I fought to keep my eyes open. I didn't get any of this on film because I was in a bad way, but I booked a hotel for the night and ran the AC non-stop. The next morning I was still feeling sick, but I needed to wrap this thing up as it had managed to drag on for 44 long days, and there were things back home that needed my attention. When I reconnected with the final sections of the Tat, it was all pavement. But in all honesty, after all I had endured, I had no problem finishing out the Tat on the highway. My clutch was cooked, my chain was rusted and kinked, my back tire was bald, my front tire was cupped, both my fork seals were blown, and my body was reaching its limit. But it was all worth it to live out my dream of riding the TransAmerica Trail. I had made it, and I got to see the Atlantic Ocean for the first time in my life. It was just as beautiful as I'd imagined. The waves swept over my boots, thus signifying the end of my journey. Thank you so much for watching the final installment of my TransAmerica Trail Adventure Across America series. After years of dreaming, months of planning, and countless days of riding, I accomplished something that I questioned was even possible. I'm glad you stuck around and got to join me for the ride.